Hey there, Internet, Wastelanders, and anyone else listening. Welcome to another episode of Grimm Grinner's Cache. I did one of these a few months back, I think just before Season 2, and discussed the concept of heroes and villains, and how, you can be the hero of your story, and the villain of another, and all the ways I like that being kind of done in media. For this segment, I'll be talking about the concept where, this whole podcast found its start. Stories and storytelling. Of course, I can't talk about telling stories without first telling you a story myself. In particular, this story is kind of how I figured out some of the weird connections that, looking back, it became a lot more clear that I was going to move towards doing something like Welcome to the Wastes. I know I uploaded a whole video discussing the story of how I came to doing this podcast, and for the most part, it's pretty succinct. Got in post-apocalyptic fiction with like Fallout 4, seeing Mad Max Fury Road, dug deeper and absorbed as much as possible, and this idea kind of festered in my mind until, summer 2020, and then I did the podcast. And yeah, there's some big details kind of in there as well. But the point I'm going to be trying to hit rewinds a bit further than that. Almost 15 years ago to when I left the town I grew up in. I call it a town. It's still a city. Moved to Toronto and went to film school. So anyone that knows me personally knows that, yeah, we're going pretty far back. So, I'd left high school with a love of film and acting and all that kind of stuff, and was really just wanting to pursue some form of career in that field. I went to film school for production, where I learned all sorts of really useful skills pertaining to film production. Lighting, sound, editing, producing, writing, the whole, all of it. Of course, just with me listing those, you can easily tell where some have come back into play. I did particularly excel at in my writing classes, and had a like. Well, yeah, it was a like at the time for editing. It was the kind of work that I found a little easier, just to be able to sit behind a computer and put stuff together. My time in film school is also where the name Grimm and the Nightmare Institute took their earliest shape. I originally came up with Grimm as a name for the production company I would have started out of film school, and I eventually made it kind of part of my online identity, taking it as kind of like my pseudo last name online. It also became the name I used for the main character in Nightmare Institute back when I started writing it. I initially did that as kind of a pilot script for my writing class, and my professor loved it, but admittedly said they saw it as more of a comic. And being really into comic books, especially at that point in time, I was spending all of my money and all of my days in a comic shop. I took that to heart, and I kind of shelved it as kind of a comic idea for a long time. I wrote out the stories and all these cool plots that obviously pulled inspiration from stuff I was into, and it all kind of stayed in my brainmates for a rainy day. So that explains a couple of points. From there, when I graduated film school, I had joined up with a shadow casting troupe for Reba the Genetic Opera here in town. And everyone in that group at the time were all the people that I really wanted to surround myself with. Actors, filmmakers, creators, artists, that kind of thing. As much as there was a lot of drama, it was still a lot of fun. It helped me learn some things about myself creatively, and help me kind of build more of a foundation on top of, high school and then film school. it was actually while I was performing with them that I started to write a multi-generational zombie story that I wanted to shoot as like a series of shorts. Um, that was gonna be like a like late Victorian, very steampunk zombie story, a modern day, and then like a futuristic one. Um, Again, something else I kind of shelved for a long time. Uh, and if you're seeing a pattern, yes, there's a pattern there. Multiple stages of my life, more than a decade ago, where I was learning skills and learning and developing stories that I wanted to tell. Um, Fast forward a bit, I left the cast for a couple of reasons, uh, but I never really lost my love of exploring different films and ways of telling stories. I was absorbing all sorts of media, video games, movies, TV shows, books, all sorts of stuff, with a general leaning towards more of the twisted and macabre. Um, which is when I saw the movie Pontypool, which at the time of this recording, you've probably seen. I've made a few posts on social media about that movie's influence, um, which at the time I didn't realize would be such a thing to burrow its way into my brain. I saw it and I really loved it. It was a really interesting way of telling a story, where the horror is mostly external. You don't see a whole lot firsthand. There was that sense of claustrophobia. You build to there's this mystery, like you don't know exactly what's going on, but you know it's not good. Um, Not long after, I went and bought the book, which tells. It's not the same story, but it still has elements. And it tells it in also a very different way. I think I read it cover to cover in like 2 days. Um, and yeah, they like just the way those stories got told was so interesting to me. Um, I even have my copy of the book is signed even, um, and of course Canadian as hell, which I really loved, and as someone who wanted to kind of work on stuff like that and keep it Canadian, definitely struck a chord with me. Um, Over time, I did let my desire, my passion for telling these stories kind of fall to the wayside. Uh, like, life happened, and even though there were so many things I wanted to do, I came up with even other stories, like, about things I was interested in, but I just wasn't doing them for whatever reasons. Um, then we come, fast forward some more until the point where I discovered Fallout and I discovered Mad Max and I discovered the Wastelands and really fell in love with post-apocalyptic fiction. Um, and I mean, if you want that story, go check out the YouTube video. It's like 25 minutes long of me rambling, kind of getting a little emotional because, some stuff happened in my life that helped me really lose myself in the wasteland and then find myself again. So, what's the point of all this? I hear you asking out in the ether, um, even though you're listening to this after I've been recording it. Time travel, haha. Well, ultimately, this is all about telling stories and the impact that really wanting to do that has had on me and has had on Grimm Grinner as a character. Through film school, through repo, through rediscovering my own identity, and even just taking in everything I find interesting. Uh, One thing is laid under the surface through my whole life, and yes, I could absolutely go back further, but we'll save that for the autobiography. Um, at the end of it all, it's storytelling. I love to tell a story, and doing Welcome to the Waste has enabled me to do exactly that. I get to weave this story of people trying to survive all these different threats in a post-apocalyptic wasteland here in Canada, told through one voice, and sometimes others, but mainly this voice, over scraps of radio. And the fact that I've been able to integrate elements of the stories I had in mind before this has made it a lot more fun too, giving new life to those stories in all sorts of different ways. But also in terms of Grimm Grinner as a character, it's had a profound effect being when it comes to storytelling. In particular, like his existence in the waste is so important for me, because as much as I'm telling these stories as as Edward to the listeners, Grimm is telling these stories to the people of the wastes. He's keeping these stories alive, and by telling them and broadcasting them out and making them available for more to hear, more people get to tell those stories. And in a world like that, it's such an important thing to do. It's what hooked me about my friend Peter's story, Bones Beneath, which some of you out there may have seen or heard through the shortest story. And I shared the reading and recording I did of it that he posted up, and it's amazing. You should definitely check it out. It's a story that very much captures the essence of what I'm going for. Just this whole concept of, when the world falls apart, it's still going to need people that show compassion and who help each other, and it will need people who tell stories. And at the end of the day, that's Grimm Grinner. As much as he fights the tyranny of the corporations, the carnage of the judge, and the ferals, and all these new forces that I'm introducing through Season 2 and into Season 3 and beyond, at the end of the day, he's telling stories. And he's trying to keep some semblance of hope alive through those stories. And having spent, at the time of this recording, I have spent 2 years kind of in various lockdowns and throughout this pandemic. So telling stories has been a way for me to keep myself centered and keep settled and keep hope alive for myself. So yeah, and I mean that's one thing I've loved about doing this podcast. That's one thing I hope you all enjoy about the podcast. And I mean, at the end of the day, I can't help but quote the Doctor as well. Specifically the 11th Doctor, with his comment about, we're all stories in the end. Let's just make it a good one. And that's my goal, I think, just in life in general, for the rest of my days, is, I'm always going to find a way to tell a story, whether it's through Welcome to the Wastes, through playing D&D, or through just literally standing around shooting the shit with friends and coworkers and people I've met, talking about cool stories in my own life. I mean, not necessarily for Grimm Grinner's Cash, but I mean, I could tell so many stories about all the different people I've met and the different bizarre ways things have been interconnected in my life. Maybe that's for another day. Maybe that's for something completely unrelated to Welcome to the Waste that I'll just post up on personal social media. Who knows? We'll see. But, yeah. At the end of the day, Welcome to the Waste is going to be just about telling stories and telling a story. And right now it's the story of Grimm Grinner, just trying to get by while he tells other stories. So yeah, this has been Grimm Grinner's Cash. Hope you enjoyed this story about storytelling. And let's see how many more times I can say story before the end of this, right? I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope up to this point in the podcast, and even past this point in the podcast, you enjoy the stories I'm telling, and I look forward to hearing your stories. And maybe I can tell some of them as well through Grimm Grinner's voice, through the wastes. So, yeah, we'll end that here, and we'll see you in the wastes.